Thank you for joining me for a walk in the garden on this January day. I'm Liz Davey, and this is a walk in the garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television. We do the show every month or twice a month, depending on how much work there is to be done in the garden. And we also include a segment on cooking at the end of the program. Today it's mid to end of January, and I'm out in the garden. I try to walk through my garden, even though there's not a whole lot going on out here right now, just to see if anything needs attention. There are some signs of green. There's a poppy, and I also check that my baskets are still in place that cover chrysanthemums and lavender plants. I have those filled with oak leaves, and so far they've stayed in place very well. There is some color in the garden. We have a red twig dogwood over here, and that gives some lovely color, and the branches are also nice to pick and add to an arrangement inside if you want to have a little something from the garden there. I've left a few things up for the birds and for a little winter height interest. Those will be chopped down as we get into spring. You'll notice there is some green. This is a poppy that put up some foliage in the fall. The grape hyacinths came up, and it looks like the deer have been busy at this one because they are chopped off at the top. So I also watch for signs of deer damage. I have an azalea and a rhododendron over there that sometimes get nibbled. If I start to see a lot of nibbling being done or see a lot of tracks if we have snow, then I know it's time to come out with the deer spray again. You can use deer spray at any season. It doesn't matter what the temperature is, as long as it isn't frozen in the bottle, and just spray things that the deer are bothering, because they will snap things off, especially as the season wears on. They get hungry, and they will go after the ornamentals as well as natural things out in the woods. And if you discourage them early in the season or throughout the season, they tend to leave the yard alone a little bit more, I've found. We don't have any snow. This has been what my grandparents and parents would have called an open winter so far. We just have had a little touch of it here and there. Snow is actually really good for the perennial garden and also the gardens. It adds a layer of insulation, so it's always good if you do have a nice snow cover. But this year, so far, we haven't had that cover. So I'm hopeful that the oak leaves that have blown in around some of the perennials will provide a little extra insulation from these cold nights we've been having. We've had the cold, but not the snow. The perennial garden is asleep. As I said, there are a few green things here and there. The primroses are starting to show some green. And the daisies still have a green undergrowth. I'm going to walk over towards the vegetable garden. My parsley is still somewhat green, but I don't think I'd want to use it because it's probably pretty stiff. It's a cold day today. I will point out that one of the things I do when I'm outside, walking around in the winter, checking on things, and cleaning up after my furry friend, I pick up brush. When you have trees, you have pieces falling all season, and if you can get a little start on it by picking up a few branches along the way, you'll be ready for some spring burning. Spring burning season in Norfolk, I believe, starts even the end of this month, January. You'll have to check. You do need a burning permit in Norfolk, and there are regulations as to where and when you can burn. And they require that you call the station after you've gotten your permit each day that you want to do any outside burning. Of course, you can always transfer it down to the transfer station too, and they'll grind it up into mulch. Now let's go over to the backyard. We're out in the shade garden now, near the pond. There are some green things still out in this area. It kind of breaks the monotony of brown that is winter. We have Kalmia, rhododendron. The carex grass is still green and will stay green until spring when I can cut it back. Also, the hellebores are starting to put up their bloom shoots. If you look very closely in the next few weeks, and we'll look at that next time, we will see the bloom shoots of the hellebores coming up through the old leaves. We also have leucothwae, which stays green all winter, as well as pine. And we have our pond, which is well frozen over. We have a nice coating of ice on that. And I do have my melter in, which is plugged into a thermostatic plug. And you'll notice that it's kept a nice hole in the ice. This lets the gases that the fish produce when their respiration and their body functions, and it lets the gases exhaust from the pond. If they build up too much in the water, the oxygen leaves it and there is no fresh oxygen coming in, and the fish will die. So far I've been able to keep my fish going for quite a number of years by using this method. And we try to keep this hole in the ice. The ice can get quite thick, but the fish are still under there. And if the snow melts or the little frost on top, sometimes you can even see them slowly moving. My shed is pretty much not being used now for anything but storage, but I would like to point out that some days if the sun shines, this warms up to at least 60 degrees. So I can be having a 30 or 40 degree day, and if I want to do something out here, I'm able to do it in 60 degree temperatures because of the sun shining through the glass. However, I can't keep plants out here because the night temperature falls down to below freezing. I do have, and I ought to point this out, what's called a max-min thermometer, and I don't know if Katie can get a shot of that or not, but what it does is it registers the minimum and the maximum temperature, and then you can reset it to the temperature that it is now, and it will tell you how low it goes and how high it goes. And it's been down to about 10 degrees in here and up to about 60, so 65, almost 70. So you can see if I reset it now, which I can do, clunk. There, I've reset it so that the min and max hands go back into the temperature that it is right now, and then tomorrow I can come out and check it and see what the temperature was last night in the shed. We know what it is outdoors by the outdoor thermometer, but I like to keep track of this, especially in the spring once I do put plants out there. I want to make sure it isn't going too low. Again, picking up sticks and just generally looking around the yard, checking for tracks to see what animals have been visiting your garden. We saw some cat tracks on the way in. I think they were cat. We also find squirrel tracks, different bird tracks, all sorts of tracks. So sometimes you can tell what animals have been there. Definitely deer tracks. The deer tracks are pretty distinctive. You can tell those from dog tracks quite easily. And you know what shrubs they've been visiting. And you can take measures to protect those shrubs if they're getting nibbled. Now it's time to go inside and do a little indoor gardening and maybe a little cooking too. Seeds and ordering seeds and planting your garden is probably the biggest task I do in January. As you can see, I get tons of seed catalogs. Once you get on one list, you're on everybody's list. For gardening supplies, for seeds, for plants. Actually, it's really nice to look through all the magazines and books that you get and the lovely seed catalogs with beautiful pictures, and you really get excited about everything. The problem is, unless you're careful, you can over-order really easily. So you really need to do some planning. Go through the books, turn down a few pages, kind of decide what you want to order. And what helps with that is the records you kept for last year, if you kept them, which I hope you did. If you have a garden, it's really helpful to look back, see what did well, what you planted when, and what you'd like more of. That's particularly on my last page, where I might want to harvest more of something. I can write that down at the time I harvest it, and I will know that I need to plant a little longer row of that thing. The other thing you need to do is to go through your old seeds. If you don't plant them all, and most people don't, you know, you have a few seeds left in a seed packet. It's possible to test the germination on these, but I've found that most seeds, with a couple exceptions, will grow for 2 or 3 years easily. So you can, if you'd only used a half of that bag of bean seed or other seeds, you can use them again this year and probably have pretty good germination. If they're more than a year or 2 old, you want to plant them pretty thickly and make sure you have extra seed in case they don't come up, or make plans for something else in that spot. The 2 seeds that don't last well would be anything in the onion or leek family, onion family. The leeks are in the onion family. And also parsnips will not come back well another year. So you need to buy fresh seed for those, and also for parsley. I tend to plant too much parsley because I plant the whole bag of parsley. I have lots of it. It comes up in the spring, I have parsley, and then I plant new seed and I have parsley again. But we like it, and I use quite a bit of it, so it's not a loss. I also have some flower seeds in here, and I'll go through this and make a list of things I have and know that I don't need to get those this year. I can use the seed that I already have. That cuts down on it a little bit. Some of these I may wish to start a little early and have seedlings, and then I'll know if they've germinated really well. I'll have plenty of beans for this year. I won't need to order those, and a few flowers too that never got planted last year. So go through any old seeds that you have. Hopefully you've kept them in a cool, dry place, but not freezing. And see what you can do. Then go through your catalogs and see what you want to add, and maybe even make a little garden plan on paper. I don't know if you can see this. I do it in pencil because I do erase it if I decide to make a change or add something else later. I put in I know I have about 20, 25 rows to work with in my garden, so I kind of decide where I want to plant things based on last year's plan and move things around so that I don't plant tomatoes in the same spot every year, for instance. I don't plant beans in the same spot every year. I try to rotate it so I don't plant anything that was there before in the same spot if I can help it. It may only be a row or 2 off from that spot, but it isn't in the exact spot. And the tomatoes I try to move around the garden in maximizing the sun to the tomatoes, peppers particularly. But using the records you kept last year can be very helpful for this year. We can do some indoor gardening tasks at this time of year. And what I'm going to try this year is what's called winter seeding. And to do that, you need to make a little seeding thing, and I'm using milk cartons. I read about this, and I thought it would be fun to try. You need to poke some holes in the top for ventilation, and it's easier to do before you start cutting it. And you also need to poke holes in the bottom for drainage. And this old ice pick that was probably my great-grandmother's is coming in real handy for this. You can use a nail. They suggested heating a screwdriver and poking holes. But since I don't have a gas stove, heating it up over a flame is kind of difficult. So I'm just using my old ice pick. Then what we want to do is cut this approximately in half. And they really cut pretty easily with a pair of kitchen scissors. Maybe a little less than half, but half the large part. And then I'll leave a little hinge on it, about there. And there I've made a cedar for going outside. Many things, according to the article I read, in this climate can be winter seeded. And January, February is the time that you want to seed out perennials and hardy type of annuals. Now that would be an annual that tends to self-seed anyway, but if you don't have any to self-seed, you need to start some plants now. Then we need to mix up some soil, and I'm going to use a little of the potting soil, and I'm putting it in a bucket here, trying to be a little neat with it. And this potting soil is a little heavy, so I'm going to add some perlite to it I'll show that. Then I'm going to mix it around, and I'll put on some gloves since it's kind of messy. Sometimes the best tool is the one on the end of your arm. And I'll mix the perlite in to lighten up this soil a bit. It's slightly damp already, but I can add a little more water. And we'll mix that in too. We want to moist soil. Normally I would do this by the sink so that I could put it into my containers. I'm going to put that right in there, a couple inches deep. And normally I would do this near the sink so that I could give it a good soaking or water it pretty well. But adding the water seems to be working well too. And I actually had made another one, so we'll do two different ones. And I'm going to pat that down. Then I'm going to take some seeds, and what I'm using today on these will be some butterfly weed, which is a plant that's wonderful for the monarch butterflies. These have been available over at Stony Brook, the packets of seed provided by the butterfly gardeners from the Norfolk Garden Club. And I have some of the seeds. And what I'm going to do is spread them. I think they have 5 or 6 seeds. And I'll just put a few of these spread out. In the pot. And then I'm going to just put a little bit of soil on top, just enough to cover it a little. And press it in well. There are directions on the back of the seed pod, and it is slow to start in spring. They say that you can just put this out right now in the garden, but I find it tends to get lost, so I wanted to start it in the pot. We'll cover it up, and then I'll take a piece of duct tape and fasten it shut. And this is all there is to it. I will pour some water in there once I get it out, or ready to go out. I'll take it over to the sink and add some water. Then I'm going to put it out in the garden. I'm going to put it away from my furry friend here so that he can't decide to play with the milk carton and upend the thing. And we're going to leave it till spring. We put it in a sunny spot. Let the snow fall on it, let the rain fall on it, and hopefully sometime later in the spring we'll see some seedlings. I also have, a friend gave me some tall verbena bonariensis, which I would love to get started in my garden. Once started, it's supposed to reseed, and it will reseed annually. And this is a very fine seed. So I'm just going to sprinkle it very lightly in here. And press it down. And hopefully we'll have some seeds to transplant later on in the spring, some little plants to transplant, and then we'll go through how to do that. Again, the next thing I need to do is get my marker, which I forgot to get out, and mark these so that I know what's in them. I'll use a Sharpie and write on them what seeds I've planted, and then put them outside into the garden. Hinges there, so we'll put the tape over here. And we'll hope we have some seedlings come spring. There are other things you can start this way, and I may try some others. Milk cartons are pretty easy to come by. You can always recycle them when you're finished with them or save them to use another time. So we have our 2 winter seedings. It's called winter sowing. And it's been somewhat popular. You don't need any lights or anything to do it because you're doing it outdoors. There is a list on the internet. If you look it up, you can find a list of things that can be sown now and things that can be sown later. Annuals and tomatoes and peppers, they even sow in April outside when it's still a little cold. This little greenhouse type container gives them enough protection that they will germinate and start growing a nice sturdy little plant, hopefully. Now, one day I went out to my compost pile and I said, "What's that?" And I looked at it and I saw that it was an avocado. I had thrown an avocado pit in the compost pile, and here I have an avocado plant. It's been drying out. I water about once a week, and so it's been drying out, and I thought, well, it needs to be repotted. And that's true. You may have plants. Hopefully you repotted some of them before you brought them in for the winter. But if they've grown a little too much, and this one I just kind of slapped in a pot when I found it. I didn't pay too much attention. But now it does definitely need to be repotted. So I got out a pot and washed it up. And I'm going to use the same lighter soil with it. And put some in. This pot might be a little large, but this thing grows pretty well. So I had an avocado tree once and lost it after about 15 years. It had been given to me by someone who moved, and they had had it for quite a long time. And finally, it just didn't make it anymore. But you'll see this thing's put down quite a few roots, and it needs some more room to expand. So we'll just set it in there. And again, let the top, a bit of the seed show at the top. Not plant it too deeply. And see if it'll continue growing. I've tried starting them with the toothpicks and the glass of water, and not really, lately, great success. But it certainly grew well in the compost pile. So you never know what you'll find in your compost besides compost. The rich soil in there seem to be very good for it. And we'll see what we can do. I also pinched the top out slightly so that we can see if we can get some branches on this avocado tree rather than just have one straight stalk all the way up. So I just took a little pinch out of the top. And there we have our avocado tree. Now, if you've been with me before, you remember we have the Forsyth pot that I built. And this is a pot for for starting seedlings. We started some, we transplanted them, and I've been growing them on under lights. And now they've gotten pretty big, which means it's time to take some more cuttings. And I can do that. I don't have any cutting powder in here, but I can just add those into this damp vermiculite. Or perlite, I guess it's perlite in this one. And I'll take just little cuttings from the top of these plants and take off the outer leaves. And where the roots will form will be where these leaves were. This is a plectranthus. We want to get good contact. This is a coleus plant, and I'm going to take a little clip right here, cut it a little shorter. This is a pretty one that gets quite large. It's a tender, very tender annual, so this will stay inside until June. But it would be nice to have another plant, so we can make another plant from this one, hopefully, or maybe two. Again, just a few leaves, even one leaf, hopefully will root in this medium. This is basically a large pot, which I've put a piece of netting in to keep the perlite in, with a small pot which has a cork in it in the middle. And this is a small clay pot. The clay pot, the water comes out of it. So what I'm going to do once I've done the cuttings into the perlite is I will put water in that central pot. Get them tight. We can probably even get a few more cuttings off of this one. It's gotten a little tall. This roots quite easily, so we'll see what we can do. And these will form roots, at least we hope they do, where the leaf nodes were, and a new plant will form. I'll add water to the center, and we'll keep the water in this until they root. Water will go out into the sides. I'm going to water the sides a little bit because it's gotten a little dry since I prepared it. And I'll put it in a plastic bag. The whole thing. Water, plants, and all. This will keep the humidity in, and we'll watch the plants and make sure they aren't too damp. We can always open the bag a little bit for some ventilation. And then we'll let this sit until these pieces root, at which point we can pot them up into pots again. And we'll have more cuttings to plant in the spring, when spring comes and we start filling containers. These can be trimmed up, as can any of the other cuttings or house plants. It's fine to go ahead and trim a little here and there. On the cuttings especially, if you have a spot that's growing a little too fast, you can always pinch it out in the middle and it will grow new leaves. We should get a few new leaves at this point and at the other points where we've taken these cuttings off. And you can see where I've pinched this one in the past. There are 2 new leaves coming, which will branch the plant. And that's how you get the branches on the little plants, so that you have some branches. This is growing some branches down here, and it should grow some up at top too. As will this one. I have 2 nice new leaves, which is why I didn't cut this top portion. I'm already getting some spreading of leaves on that one, and it will branch out. House plants need to be kept watered, and I've brought in my pond plants, and this is one of the pond plants. This one I have put into another pot which doesn't have any drainage holes in it. Because this lived in the water, also my elephant ears, I've done the same thing. I've used dish pans actually under them. And I've put the pots into the water and I keep the water full. You'd be amazed at how fast the water goes down in the house. It adds humidity to your air in the house, which you need at this season. But I add water to this at least once a week and fill it right up. And this way I don't water the plant itself, just around it, and it soaks up the water from the bottom. This plant is looking better than it's ever looked without water around it inside in the winter. You do need to watch and water when plants need it. You don't want to overwater plants or the roots will rot. About once a week for me seems to work quite well. And if anything is really drying out fast, then you know you need a larger pot generally, that the roots have outgrown the size of the pot you had, as we found with this lovely little avocado. These are our little winter seeding greenhouses that we have taped shut and watered. And we're going to put these out in the garden right here next to the fence. And they've been labeled, and I can see the labels here. I might add a few more to them later on. And we'll just leave them there until spring, and we'll see what happens, see if we can get some seedlings from them. And that's all there is to winter seeding. I'm looking forward to seeing how well it works. It's an experiment on my part, but I have a feeling it's going to work just fine because these are seeds that would normally sow themselves and then come up in the spring. And today I'm making one of our favorites, which is called meatball chowder. It's a really hearty soup, and it also freezes well. So I tend to make, it takes a little bit of doing to make it, so I tend to make quite a bit. The first thing I want to make are my meatballs. And I'm going to start with ground beef and parsley, some breadcrumbs or panko crumbs. Put things up there and in the sink. A couple eggs. And some seasoning. Seasoned salt is what my original recipe called for. I use Mrs. Dash. We kind of watch the salt, as many people should, and we like the Mrs. Dash pretty well. You can add salt at the end, but I prefer not to add it as I'm cooking. I'm also going to add 2 tablespoons of milk. And check my recipe that I've got everything in there that needs to be in there. A little pepper. I'll just put a few grinds in. Again, you can add salt and pepper at the end. And if you've ever made soup and put too much salt in the first place, it's pretty hard to correct. So it's better to undersalt initially. And I'm going to mix this up. And I use a fork. You can also use your hands if you wish. You may get to that because I'm going to use my hands to form the meatballs. I'll start it like this. This was 2 pounds of ground beef, 2 tablespoons of parsley, 2 tablespoons of milk, 2 teaspoons of seasoning or seasoned salt, and 2 eggs. This is my meatball mixture. And I'm going to use my hands on this to thoroughly mix it. And then I'm going to form some meatballs. The parsley, by the way, is the last of my garden parsley that I put in jars probably 2 months ago. It's been in the refrigerator in glass jars. It will last a long time. And it was still fine today. And if I had another glass jar, I would probably still have parsley. But since I only put 2 jars in, I've used it. So now I have to wait for spring for fresh parsley, unless I wish to buy it. Now I'm going to make little meatballs and put them in this dish. At this point you can fry them if you would like to, or you can bake them, but I prefer to microwave them. It's just a lot easier. I'm going to make a dish full of meatballs. And you put them around in a circle. You can make a concentric circle, which is what we're going to do. A little messy, but again, mixing in any that didn't get mixed too well. This makes quite a lot of soup. I will usually serve it and then make a couple containers. Nice to have in the freezer. A lot of illness in the area lately, and it's nice to have some in the freezer if you have a friend that's been sick. You can take them a container of soup, and they usually are quite appreciative. I know I am. Also, having some things like soup and casseroles in the freezer, looking ahead to April, and times when you want to be outdoors, when that first spring weather hits and you really don't want to be inside too much, having some good hearty dishes in the freezer for when you come inside is always nice. You know you have a supper that you can prepare rather quickly. Okay, we'll be making more meatballs later, but for now, I'm going to wash my hands and put it over on the other side. I'll move this and the fork. And I'll put a piece of wax paper over this as I put it in the microwave. "5 minutes, and then we'll have meatballs. I do my meatballs the same way if I'm making meatballs and spaghetti. I may season them a little different, add a little garlic, a few more seasonings, but basically I cook them in the microwave. Then I add them to the sauce and I heat that. Again, they may not be completely finished when they come out in 5 minutes, but they will finish up whenever you add them. Now, to add the ingredients for the soup. It looks like a lot of ingredients, but it goes together pretty quickly, and it's things that are generally available. I've got about 3 potatoes and 6 cups of water. I put the potatoes in the water because I peeled and diced them earlier. If you peel and dice potatoes earlier and just put them in a bowl in the refrigerator or out on the counter, they will turn brown. But if you put water over them, and since I had to use 6 cups of water in the soup anyway, I decided that was a pretty good idea. We've also got about 3 good-sized sweet onions, and those are cut up. Half a dozen carrots, cut in pieces. And we're going to add tomato juice, 6 cups. I think I was a little under on the water, so I may add a little more water to rinse it out. I'm going to add what would be the equivalent of 6 bouillon cubes. And again, I like this better than bouillon stuff, which is a paste. And it is less salty, which is always good. It has quite a bit of salt, but not as much as the bouillon cubes do. So I'll add a couple tablespoons of this to the soup. This gives it some beef flavor. Now that I'm not dipping back into the jar, I can just add it to the soup. Stir it around a little bit. At this point, we better start turning on the stove. I'm going to add 2 bay leaves and a tablespoon of sugar. You can add extra salt now, but as I said, I don't add salt until later so that I know that I'm not getting it too salty. This is 1/4 cup of white rice, and we'll add that in. That cooks normally in about 20 minutes, so it's you'll have plenty of time to get it cooked into the soup. We'll stir it around a little bit. And I'll add a little marjoram. We want to add 1/2 to a teaspoon. So I'll do a heaping 1/2 teaspoon of marjoram. And we have the ingredients for our soup all set. Except for one thing, and that's a can of Mexicorn. And we'll add this a little later on, right before we serve it. And we're waiting for the meatballs, and then we will bring this to a boil, and then we'll let it simmer for a half hour, an hour, however long you want, at least a half an hour to cook the potatoes and the vegetables before you serve it. You can cover it then and cook it at a slow boil. I'm going to cover it now to get it going. So it goes together pretty fast once you've cut up all the vegetables. And again, you often have many of the things available. And we'll make more meatballs and add those a little later. And keep it simmering. I've got it on high till it comes to a boil, and then we'll just simmer it down. And our meatballs are almost ready, our first tray of meatballs. And the pan will be hot. Actually, I'm going to add these to the soup, juice and all. It's a great way to cook meatballs. 5 or 6 minutes in most microwaves. Perfect. I'll use the same pan to form the rest of the meatballs and add them a little later. What do you serve with soup when you have soup for supper? We've got our meat in here, we've got our vegetables. We can always get out some bread or rolls or crackers. Nice thing to serve is pie. And so I'm going to work on making what's called an Amish vanilla pie. And this is kind of an old-fashioned recipe. And we're going to start by cooking part of the ingredients. And we've got a 1/2 cup brown sugar. And brown sugar dries out really fast when you put it out ahead of time. This was very moist in the package and starting to dry out rather quickly. I'm going to add to that a tablespoon of dark corn syrup and the tablespoon of flour I put in. An egg, and I'm going to turn on my burner and get that going. I'm going to stir this around. And add 1 cup of water. Keep stirring it. And since it's a vanilla pie, we better add some vanilla to that. And this is going to be 1½ teaspoons, so 3½ teaspoons. If you have children or grandchildren that like to cook, learning fractions by cooking is a wonderful thing to do. They will remember them. I always ask how many ways that you can measure out a cup, how many ways you can measure a ½ cup. They get a little math whether they know it or not. We're going to let this cup bring to a boil. I'm going to check on my soup and see if that's boiling yet. Not quite. It's getting there. And then we can turn it down to a simmer. Keep stirring this mixture. Starting to thicken now, and it will soon be at a boil. We're starting to get some good bubbles here, and it is boiling. Now, normally I would just put this over onto another burner and let it cool for a couple hours, but we don't have a couple hours. So what I'm going to do is put it into a bowl. And put that bowl into another bowl that's got ice in it. And hopefully this will cool it down because we need it cool. And we need to wipe up our spill also. And I'll stir this in here a little bit, but we need to make a topping for the pie while this is cooling in the ice bath. This is a good way if you have to cool something a little quicker. Get it out of the hot pan and put it into some ice, give it a stir every once in a while, and let it cool. The next thing we want to do is make a topping for the pie, and I'm going to do that in the processor. This is, again, a strange recipe, but it does work. A cup of flour, another ½ cup of brown sugar. We're going to make some crumbs to put on the top. I have ½ teaspoon of cream of tartar and a little bit of salt. I'm having trouble getting it out. And a ½ teaspoon of baking soda. I'm going to buzz this a little bit to mix it. And then we'll add 1/4 cup of butter, which has been cut in pieces. And we want to spin that until it gets crumbly. And there it is. Take the top out. Then we'll see how this is coming. And it's cooled some. Our filling is now cooled somewhat, and I'm going to pour it into a unbaked pie shell. If you've been with me before, we did some pie pastry in the past, or you can use one that you've purchased. We made the crumbs for the topping, and I'm just going to spread those on top of the filling, and everything's going to kind of bake together. Still a little jiggly. I'm going to put this in the oven at 350 degrees for 40 minutes. And when it's finished, it's going to look like this. We have our pie that can be cut. And you'll notice it is no longer jiggly. Once it's cooked and refrigerated, it becomes quite solid, and you can cut it. And it has a kind of a butterscotch flavor with all of the brown sugar and the vanilla. We're ready to serve our soup. We can add that Mexicorn. You can add just regular corn. The Mexicorn has some pepper in it. You could use regular corn, add your own pepper, or a can of Mexicorn. It just has some red and green bell pepper added. And I'll stir that one up. Well, you have all your vegetables. You'll take the bay leaves out when you go to eat your soup. You don't want those in the bowl. And we'll put this on a plate. You could also serve some bread with this meal and some fruit, maybe, along with the pie. We like it with a little Parmesan or Asiago cheese grated on the top. It'll melt right into that soup. And there you have meatball chowder and Amish vanilla pie. Pie and soup make a great winter meal. This has been a walk in the garden with some time in the kitchen. I'm Liz Davey, and this is NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television.